All right. What's the date today? The 16th. What is it? June of the never-ending year. June 16th,
Mhm.
year of our Lord 2020. We're talking about eschatology today. We're talking about the rapture and antichrist and mark of the beast and all kinds of that weird stuff. Oh, what's up, Jillian? All that stuff we were raised on. Um, and I've covered a lot of this stuff in various sermons, and so I pulled a bunch of it together today. The central text here is Matthew 24. And I may do like half this week and half next time, which is like 2 weeks from now, because there's a lot. But if I can, I'll just power on through it there. Okay. Oh, make sure everybody mutes their microphones. Paul Clark, mute your microphone for me there. Oh, you know what? I can do that. Mute. Oh, boom. Okay, let's do it. So in the last 170-ish, 175-ish years, Christians have been doing weird things with the Bible. I mean, Christians have always done some weird things with the Bible, but in the last a couple hundred years or so, they've done some particularly weird things, ways that have diverged from the historic church, from the original first century church, and how they sort of viewed what was coming down the road, what God was doing, where this was going to end, all kinds of stuff. And in the last couple of centuries, we've really kind of made it about the world being destroyed, made it about us being the center of this whole thing. And I want to talk about a lot of this today. So I'm going to start off. I'm going to share my screen here. I'm going to throw it to my iPad, where I have lots of visuals. Okay. Everybody can see that? Yes? Anybody? All right, good. Now, oh, wait, I'm on the wrong page here. Let me back up. I'm going through a lot of the Scofield stuff today. I grabbed some of my visuals from some of the sermons I've done before. So, okay, I'll start right here. This is sort of, there's two things you need to understand about how the early Jewish people viewed time. They believed that basically there were two ages. There was what's called the present age, which is what they believed that they were living in. It was the age where they were sort of in and out of exile, attempting to get back and set up the kingdom. And they believed an event would happen that would cause their kingdom to be set up. Now, when they talk about the kingdom, they mean an earthly kingdom. They don't mean like flying away somewhere else. They mean a kingdom where they have a Davidic king, and they are ruled over by God, who is over the Davidic king, and the Davidic king is over Israel and the rest of the world, okay? And that there would be this event that would be like the end right here, right? And this end would be some big eschatological event that would bring about what's called the age to come, which is them then living in that restored world, where they believed everything would be right. It would be a world of peace. There would be no more war. And then they could finally just live and exist and live the way they always dreamed that they would, as a people in peace in a world made right and just. And so they split all of time into two sections: present age and the age to come. So let's fast forward a little bit. I want to sort of show you what happened with the revelations of Jesus, the things that Jesus taught, the ways that he shifted how the early Christians came to view all of time. So the Christians basically understood the time that they were living in with Christ on the earth as the event. They were in the present age with the coming of Christ. It had begun, and it had existed here, and then it had been consummated with the resurrection and the planting of the church. Okay, that this was the event. The event was not one particular thing. It was a series of events: the life of Christ, the teachings, the death, burial, and resurrection, Jesus replacing the temple, showing them, reinterpreting the law, all of the scriptures. And so the church right here, when you read things like Paul, when he writes to Corinth and he says, us, upon whom the ends of the ages have come. This is what they're talking about right here, this section in the middle. When I move the mouse, can you see that? Yep. Okay, good. That helps a lot. And so now, with the coming of the church, with the Spirit forming the church. We are sort of right here, they would say. They would say this is the line that we are at. We are both in the age to come because we are dwelling in the kingdom of God, but we are also in the between time. So this is what theologians call the already, but the not yet, but already, right? So we are living in the age to come, but the world has not realized it yet. It is not fully present. We are like the seed planted in the ground. The farm exists, all right? But it's not up out of the ground, so everyone can't recognize it yet, okay? So technically, we are in the age to come. Oftentimes, this is all sort of missed and forgotten, and when modern people today talk about the present age, they think they're talking about now, and they think there will be some big event that will be the end, and then they talk about how there will be an age to come later. That is removed from how the early church actually believed the world existed in their day. They believe we are already in the age to come, okay? And this gets very confusing because over the years, people have developed all kinds of theories and names, and you have amillennialists and premillennialists and all kinds of stuff, ways that people try to explain how we will get to the age to come. And so when they ask you, what are you? What's your theology? They're expecting you to say amillennialist, premillennialist, stuff like this. But I think the entire premise is wrong because we are already living in the age to come. I guess I am what you would call a preterist. I think the book of Revelation is not necessarily about the future. I believe it's about the past. I believe it's about things that were happening in their day. And that's some of the stuff I'm going to argue this morning. And again, if you disagree, it's totally fine. It doesn't matter in the end. But I do believe how you believe God is bringing about his future will oftentimes determine how you live today. So a lot of where we get our theology, a lot of it comes from Matthew 24, where Jesus talks about this whole thing of there's like destruction. There's two people walking up a hill and one is gone. The lyrics of the song are in my head. One disappears, one left standing still. My kids are here running around. So if you look at Matthew 24, especially verses like 15 to 44, those to evangelicals American evangelicals have become this huge, terrifying message about how the world's going to end and how God's going to rapture his people, pull them up into the sky, taking them away from the earth into the clouds. And the vast majority of people, they believe, will suffer immensely for 7 years who are left behind. And then they're going to be slaughtered by Jesus on a sword, on a horse with a sword. He's going to ride around slaughtering people. Or sometimes they'll get a little more figurative about this and stuff like that. But then eventually, everyone's going to be thrown in eternal conscious torment and stuff like that. So, and the earth is going to be destroyed, not remade. It's going to be replaced with like a new heaven and new earth. And that's kind of how I was raised Southern Baptist. I was dispensationalist. If you don't know what that is, it doesn't matter. If you do know what it is, you definitely understand what I'm talking about. So there's some interesting things that we need to know to sort of get our bearings on what's going on with how to read passages like Matthew 24 and Daniel 7 and Revelation and stuff like that. First things we need to know is we need to get our bearings on our ideas. So first off, all of this stuff that I've just been talking about is very new. It is less than 180 years old. The idea of raptures and the idea of the 7 years of tribulation, the ideas of stuff like that, that is all very new theology. It is also specifically American theology. There are no major denominations outside of American Evangelical Church that actually believes those things. It is just Americans who believe that. And they have written their own nation, our people. They have written us into that story. If you read books like the Left Behind series, it ends with, a bunch of Americans with guns hiding in the hills on the cliffs and shooting people. And sort of like, this is how the whole thing goes. And so oftentimes they'll even make their own people, the Americans, the center of the whole thing. So let's talk about the rapture. The rapture has its origins in the 19th century in a place called Glasgow in Scotland. So in the year 1830, there was a young girl who had a vision at a healing service. Her name was Margaret MacDonald, and she basically, during this healing service that was being that was going on in their town, in the tent, you know, the big revival service, she has this vision of this two-staged return of Jesus Christ. And she's the one that sort of kicks off this whole thing. She has this vision, and the story of her vision is written down by a man named John Nelson Darby. And Darby is a British evangelical preacher and the founder of what's called the Plymouth Brethren, who are actually, I believe, Anabaptists of all things, which is weird that this theology came out of that. But the Brethren, I think, are cousins of the Anabaptists. And I actually grew up, part of my childhood, I went to Grace Brethren, which is sort of a weird reformed mix of Brethren Anabaptist theology. It was interesting. And basically, Darby goes through and searches the scriptures to look for things that verify the things that she says she saw in her vision. And so the idea was that one day Jesus would, the idea that one day Jesus would reign as king had always been taught in Christianity. And it's supposed to be sort of our hope for the world. And it's central to all the ancient Christian creeds. But Darby was claiming now, because of this vision and because of his search of the Bible, he was claiming that Jesus was going to come twice, not one time, to be the king. And between 1859 and 1877, he started making these missions trips to America and preaching this, and it wasn't really taking root well in his own country. And he started coming to America and preaching this, and started a lot of people started converting to these ideas. A lot of new converts started believing in this idea of the rapture, that Jesus is going to sort of come and whisk all the Christians away into the sky, and he's going to take them with him somewhere while the world fell apart in turmoil. But in general, Christians have never believed this. This is a brand new idea that came from this vision. And in 1909, in the late 1800s, late 1870s, 1880s, Darby solidifies sort of this idea of what he calls dispensationalism. He invents this doctrine of dispensationalism, which is what I was raised in as a Baptist. And dispensationalism wins over a very crucial guy who comes to follow it. His name is Cyrus Scofield. I have somewhere, it's probably over there. Oh yeah, I can see it from here. My Scofield Bible. When I went to Liberty University in the late 90s, it was a required Bible that you had to have. New King James, Scofield Reference Bible, Chain Reference Bible. And when you used it, here, I'll show you a picture of one of the original ones. This is a 1909 Scofield Reference Bible. And the way this worked is, he had these along the sides, there are these little what he calls chain references. And it picks a word, and you follow these chains all through the Bible. And what it does is it picks this theme, and it traces it from the beginning of scriptures all the way to the end. And they all sort of land in Revelation. And it's filled with all kinds of notes from Scofield that are that read like a commentary, that sort of instruct you on how to read the passages, okay? And the Scofield Reference Bible that came out in 1909 was hailed as perhaps the most important single document in all of fundamentalist literature. It's the most important document that has ever come out of fundamentalist literature. So Scofield's Bible was filled with interpretive notes about dispensationalism, and it sold millions and millions of copies in America, and not really very many other places. It sold out in America. And it became the Bible that most Americans used throughout most of the 20th century. And so Darby and his notes are woven through every page of this thing. And it told a story that kind of goes like this. I'm going to narrow down the story. If you take all the chain references and you take all the notes that Scofield wrote in this thing that he got from Darby, that he got from Margaret, here's what he says, basically. I'm going to start like this. So first off, he says that there will be 7 years of tribulation, okay? And these are the references that he leans heavy on. Matthew 24:21, it says, "For there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again." Okay? He strings these things sort of together like this. Now, the first thing he says is, before these 7 years of tribulation, there's going to be a rapture, okay? The rapture comes from Matthew 24:31. I didn't put this up here for some reason, but here it is. I'll read it to you. Then will appear the sign of the Son of Man in the heavens. And then all the people of the earth will mourn when they see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven. With power and great glory, he will send his angels with a loud trumpet call, and he will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heavens to the other. And then if you add Matthew 24:31, if you add that to 39, 40, 41, and 42, it says this: at the coming of the Son of Man, two men will be in a field, one will be taken and the other will be left. Two men will be grinding with a handmill, one will be taken, the other will be left. Therefore, keep watch, because you do not know what day your Lord will come. And I'm already hearing the DC Talk song, I Wish We'd All Been Ready, playing in my brain right now. And this to him meant Jesus was going to come. He's going to gather all the people, and they're all going to meet together in the sky, and they're all going to fly away together. He's reading this in his time as if it was written for his time. He's not understanding the context of what it meant to have the Son of Man, which would be an earthly human ruler from the book of Daniel that would conquer earthly kings. He's not taking into account the idea of what it means to come in the clouds, this word parousia, the great appearance. He's not understanding all the Roman context. An appearance, a parousia, that we translate as like a rapture, a catching up, stuff like that. That was a regular happening in the Roman Empire. It was what happened when a king visited a city. They would rush out from all over the city to meet the king, and they would sing and dance and play horns and throw a parade and escort him into the city. The king it never once happened that the king came and stopped about a mile from the city and the people ran out there and then they all turned and they went back to the king's house. That never happened. It was always the king is escorted into the city. It's a celebration that the king is returning. Okay? Even Tolkien understood this. The return of the king is centered around this whole idea. Darby, however, didn't understand that. He didn't understand the context in which the scriptures were written. And he takes Matthew 24, and he basically, he says there'll be a rapture, and then there's going to be, he sees in his reading, 7 years of global tribulation. He says, and again in chapter 24, verse 21, for then there will be great distress, unequaled from the beginning of the world until now, and never to be equaled again. And then you go down to 24:9. It says, then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. Then you go down to 24:12, and it says, because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. So the world is going to get progressively darker and darker and darker because all the Christians are gone. And we were the only thing sort of holding it together and giving it hope. And so John describes in the book of Revelation, he sort of combines this with some passages of Revelation where John describes 7 seals being opened on 7 scrolls, one for every year of tribulation. And every time one is opened, there's another catastrophe and the world gets worse and worse. And each one is releasing hell upon the earth, famine and war and pestilence, each killing millions of people as part of God's wrath upon humanity for all of their sins. Okay, and then we get, what else do we have here? Oh yeah, one more tribulation passage, Matthew 24:13 and 14. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So the general idea was there would be some who maybe after the rapture would be convinced, that's what would convince them, and then they would finally trust Jesus, and then their whole goal would be to survive and not fall away, not worship the beast. And at the end of this, there would be this battle of Armageddon, where Jesus would meet in the valley of Megiddo. He would ride back with all of us that had been raptured on horses. And in Revelation 14:20, it sort of describes this. It says, they were trampled on wine in the winepress outside the city, and the blood flowed out of the winepress, rising as high as the horses' bridles for a distance of 200 miles. So God's going to kill everyone and then leave and then destroy the earth. Okay. And in the midst of all this, there's going to be these sort of 4 horsemen of the apocalypse, right? There's a white horse in Revelation 6:1 and 2. A white horse, its rider held a bow. He was given the crown, and he rode out as a conqueror bent on conquest. And then you have Revelations 6:3 and 4 describes the red horse. He would be the second one to come out. A fiery one, its rider was given power to take peace from the earth and to make men slay each other. To him was given a large sword. And then you have the black horse. It describes it as a black horse, its rider holding a pair of scales in his hand. And then I heard what sounded like a voice among the four living creatures saying, a quart of wheat. So in other words, incredible inflation. Nobody can afford to buy food. Let's keep moving. And lastly, the pale horse. The pale horse, its rider was named Death, and Hades was followed close behind by him. They were given power over a fourth of the earth to kill by sword, famine, plague, and by the wild beasts of the earth. Okay. And so all of these things, all of these writers of the text were assumed to be talking about the same thing instead of talking about separate things. And each one of them were projected as talking about the end of the world. Because remember, if we're living in the age, in the present age, and we're waiting for the age to come, then you're going to connect all of this with the age that is to come. But the early Christians didn't do that. The early Christians believed that they were already living in the age to come. They were already living in the kingdom of God. And so when the Bible is separated from its context in Second Temple Judaism, what happens is modern readers begin to inject our own meaning into the text. And I want you to think about all of the generations that have come in the last 200 years, everything that they've seen, everything that they've experienced. This has been the most violent couple of centuries in human history. There's been more death, more slaughter and genocide than at any point in human history. In the last, really, even 100 years has been the worst. And imagine, you're sitting in all of these times, and every generation now, because things are getting more and more violent, every single generation looks at these things and they say, especially those living through World War I and then World War II, 9/11, we look at these things and we always center it on us, and we say, we are the last generation. We are the ones who will not die and all this. And I want you to think about the generations living through all the world wars, through the famine and disease, through colonialism and slavery, through conquering empires, a lot like the time, much like the time that men like Darby and Scofield were writing. And we begin to see their own story in the same way that they saw their story in the Bible. We begin to see our story in the Bible. There was literally, I have a friend who was texting me the other day who literally said, you're not going to believe what happened. Someone walked, he owns a company. He said, somebody walked into my office, one of my employees, and she quit her job. And he's like, why are you quitting your job? He said, because it's the end of the world. I've read Revelation. I see the scrolls are being opened, and everything that is happening right now is what's being talked about in the Bible. And by the way, not to get political, this always happens when conservatives begin to lose their stance and progressives begin to gain stance. Conservatives always think it's the end of the world because Satan only works through the left. And so this is sort of how they kind of view things. And it's definitely a culture you get immersed in, and you don't have any other lens through which to see things. So the question we need to ask is, what was Jesus specifically talking about in his day, in his time? What was happening? What can we see through looking at history? Honestly, Matthew 24 is referencing the things that were going to happen in his lifetime and that did happen in his lifetime. And in fact, the book of Matthew was written after those things happened. Even though Jesus is talking about them beforehand, the book was written afterwards, okay? And that's some stuff we kind of need to grasp. So they even have, when they're writing the story, they even have 20/20 vision, looking back on the thing. And remember, Matthew 24:34, Jesus says, this generation will certainly not pass away until these things have happened. Jesus is literally telling them, these things are going to happen now. You are going to see them. And then he describes these things. And next week, I want to kind of go into a lot more of like, maybe what specifically happened. What is it, when it talks about the destruction and the death and two men grinding at the mill and one is taken, what is all this about? So I'll do that next week, but I want to look at some of the symbolism of the things that we've already looked at. So the Bible is a book about who is king. Primarily, from the very beginning to the very end, the Bible is a book about who is king. It is not about going to heaven. It is not about escaping hell. It is not about even necessarily who we are in our place in the world. It is about God. It is about God being king and how Jesus became king, okay? That is the argument from beginning to end. And the answer that is offered in the Bible, and the question to who is king, is that Jesus is the answer, that Jesus is above all of the other kings, and he is the king of all the kings. He is the Prince of Peace. He is the one that all the other things that these kings are promising you, Jesus is the only one that can give these things, okay? N.T. Wright says, basically, all earthly rulers, presidents, and kings and emperors are merely caricatures of what Jesus is the reality. Okay, this is how he describes it. So this mark of the beast stuff, this is what this is about. There is a man during the time of John. I want to talk specifically first about the mark of the beast and about how to understand some of the Revelation stuff. The beast, the antichrist. What is this? Who is this? What is this 666 thing? What is all these numbers? So first off, Revelation 13, 16 through 18 says this. It talks about this beast. It says, this beast also, he forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands and on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name, which is 666. And goes on to describe that. Now, there was a man in John's day. Oh, yeah, there's the Battle of Armageddon verse that I thought I didn't have on here, but there's that, Revelation 14, 20. This man, Domitian, he ruled in AD 70. His full name is right here. Autocrator, Kaiser, Domitianus, Sebastius, Germanicus. That's where we get a word for Germany. It's what that would eventually, he would rule over eventually. So in Roman numerals, here's how you would write his name right here. Here's sort of like the sort of, this is what would be put on a coin. This is a short version of this name. And this inscription exists in the Roman Empire. We can find it. We can see it in several things, including coins. And in Roman numerals, in their system of alphabet and writing, every letter had a numeric value. Here are the numeric values. An A was a 1. See, A1, A1. Alpha, a chi was 20. You have iota is a 10. You have all these things. So work your way down. And his name literally equals 666 when you add up the numbers that are there. It is widely believed that there are two candidates for whom John was talking about in the book of Revelation, either Nero or Domitian. Or it's possible that since John lived through both, that he's talking about a combination of both, and maybe just talking about the seat of the throne of the Roman Empire. Either way, the Christians called the emperor regularly. They called him the dragon, okay? Nero was called the dragon, and Domitian was called the dragon. John just calls the emperor the beast. The dragon, the beast, same thing. And he tells them in poetic, amazing, apocalyptic language who the guy is. He's specifically talking about Domitian. I'm sure there's someone out there on the internet, on YouTube, that made a video making somehow Hillary Clinton the Antichrist and making her name equal 666. Promise you that exists. And I promise you they've done it for every world leader that there is. I've seen it for Benjamin Netanyahu. I've seen it for Obama. I've seen it for all of them. And this is likely who John has in his mind when he's writing the book of Revelation. In Matthew's day, Emperor Domitian had made a decree that no one could buy or sell in the marketplace unless they first worshipped and bowed down to the emperor as Lord and King. This was something that Emperor Domitian decreed. He was trying to weed out the Christians who would not confess that Caesar was Lord. They were beginning to be difficult because they wouldn't worship, they wouldn't take part in the emperor cult. And by proclaiming that Jesus is Lord, you're basically saying that the emperor is not Lord. Caesar is not Lord. Domitian and Nero are not Lord. And they were trying to weed these people out. And so you can see him doing this. You went down to the agora to buy and sell in the marketplace. Let's see, do I have any more things? Oh yeah, I do. So you go down to buy and sell in the marketplace. And first you must stop off at the little booth on your way in. There's a gate and there's some guards there and they're watching you, and you drop a coin with the emperor's face. You drop it in the dish. You grab some incense. You take it over to the altar. and you put it on the altar, and there's the sweet smelling aroma that arises and fills the place, and it rises up to the gods, and the gods are made happy. By the way, this is part of the sacrifices in the temple too. They were made to make a sweet smelling. You can see this all through the Old Testament, a sweet smelling smell for God, right? This was a very normal way to worship the gods, because, you know, the smoke rises up, okay? And you got to keep the gods happy. Otherwise, the gods are going to get mad, and Rome is going to start losing some territory and some battles. And so the Christians, they would go down to the marketplace, and they would try to buy and sell the stuff that they always had. And the guards were there, and they're like, first, you need to worship the God. And they're like, oh, I'm not going to do that. And they're like, well, then you can't buy or sell. If you did, you would get a mark on your hand or on your forehead that would allow you to buy and sell in the marketplace. This is not about computer chips. This is not about some future thing. This is not about tattoos and barcodes being put on your face. This is literally something that actually happened. And it's basically trying to tell you the difficult situations of the life of the Christians in the early first centuries. There was a group of people. Oh man, what does John call them? I don't want to take all the time to look up the reference because that'll take up too much time. But John refers to this group of people hold on a second. I lost the chat box. Where's the chat box? Give me a second. I don't remember what they're called. John refers to this group of people who are disgraceful, and it's in the first few chapters of John where the 7 churches are at. And these people he mentions, he says, don't be like them. These people are basically the kind of people that would walk up and they would worship, they would basically make the sacrifices, and claim that like they worship, but would cross their fingers and wouldn't really mean it and would continue to worship Jesus. And John says, you're either all in or you're all out. This is going to cost you to follow Jesus. By the way, when you read the first 7 churches of Revelation, the first thing the book of Revelation does is it starts off by trying to hint you off to who they're talking about. So it starts off with these 7 churches, and these 7 churches are all in sort of one particular area in Rome. And the vast majority of these churches were in areas where we know they were trying to worship Jesus and the emperor. So they were trying to go along to get along. And so he starts off by gathering all these church leaders, sort of by writing them a letter and saying, hey, you in Smyrna, I see what you're doing, and I have this many things for you, and this many things I have against you. So 3 things are in your favor, 4 things I have against you. And if you don't change these things, this is going to happen. You in Laodicea, 2 things are going good over there, and 3 things you need to change, or things are going to be taken. Your candle stand is going to be taken out. What he's doing here is mimicking exactly what Domitian used to do every few years. He ruled over 7 cities. He would gather the heads, the kings of these 7 cities, and he would gather them together, and he would look at them around the table and say, this is what you're doing right. This is what you're doing wrong. If you don't change it, you're going to be killed, and I'm going to be taking your land away and giving it to someone else. Okay? This is all well documented. I'm pretty sure he's talking about Domitian. And so the book of Revelation it's written a lot to hint you off. They don't give you the name of who it is, because that would be a really stupid thing to do, is to write a piece of propaganda down and send it out throughout the empire so that whoever's carrying it can get arrested and killed. No, you're going to write in Jewish apocalyptic literature that a Roman soldier is going to read it and be like, I don't understand any of this. I think they were high when they wrote it. And they're going to roll it back up, and they're going to send it back along. The Christians are going to receive it, and they're going to read it, and they're going to understand exactly what he's saying. He's saying, the empire looks strong. The empire looks big. Don't you worry about it, okay? Now, one of the other ways that we know that he was likely talking about Domitian is that Domitian wanted to be worshipped so badly that he commissioned an Olympic-style competition called the Domitian Games that contained numerous worship ceremonies, many of which were are parodied in John's book of Revelation. So John describes all kinds of, there's one point where he describes sort of an arena, and he describes like this worship ceremony going on, and the Domitian Games would have special places, special times where Domitian would be there, or representatives of himself would be there, and the whole place would be worshiping, and it would be stacked sort of, let me show you. Here's the Domitian Hippodrome, where some of these games would happen and these races would happen. And people would be stacked up and seating all around the edges, and they would all sing these praises. But John describes, he uses a lot of this imagery, and he says, oh yeah, there was people, and they were worshiping the Lamb But then I looked up, and above those people, there were beasts, and they were worshiping. And then I looked even higher, and there were angels, and they were worshiping. And the higher I look, the more and more the dead saints, they're worshiping. And the more and more I look, the more I see all of the universe is worshiping. Stupid Domitian. All you got is a bunch of people in a circle. We got the entire universe worshiping our guy. And the big idea is Rome was always claiming to be the victor, but John is arguing, no. Jesus is the victor. The kingdom of Christ will live forever, not the kingdom of Rome. And so he's even using sort of some of the gods that would worship, and he's taking these gods and he's making them worship Jesus instead. You have this one beast with wings and he's proclaiming Jesus is Lord, Jesus is Lord. It's the same being that in the Domitian games they would sort of describe as, in the songs they would sing, proclaiming Rome is the victor and Domitian is Lord, or whatever. So Domitian wanted to be worshipped, and so he invented these Olympic games called the Domitian Games that contained all kinds of worship ceremonies about him. At the highlight of the Domitian Games, it ended, from what we know, it ended with a horse race between 4 different colored horses. Okay, are you following me? And it's sort of like if you've ever been to medieval times in Orlando, and if you've ever been there, like they divide the crowd up into 4 teams, right? 4 different colors, and you're rooting for your knight, okay? This is sort of like how this would work. Different people in the stands, they would be divided up into, and there would be 4 different horses from 4 different colors, 4 different colored horses dressed up, either painted or just dressed up in garments. And there was a pale horse, and there was a black horse, and there was a red horse, and there was a white horse. And it reminds you, obviously, of Revelation 6:1-8, of all these different horses. What John is doing, he's saying, like, all of this is centered on, like, this guy wants us to worship him. But worshiping him, you know what this brings about? Death, disease, suffering, sin, atrocity. By worshiping the beast, by taking part in that garbage, you are contributing to the destruction of all things that God has given to you to be good and beautiful and wonderful. And so John takes that and he puts it in the book, and he allows it to tell the story of not worship of Domitian, but destruction of the empire. And in Revelation, here, I'm going to go ahead and this is the Hippodrome where Domitian's horse races would take place, right here. Revelation 6:1-8, it even ends with, it says this, it says, a pale horse, its rider was named Death, and Hades was following close behind him. And I love this because when you read about what would happen during the games, all the dead people, they would have these, people would be slaughtering each other. And then when the games, different sections of the games ended, these guys wearing masks of Death and Hades would come running out onto the field and grab the bodies and drag them off. Exactly what John is talking about. And what else? Like Matthew 24, Revelation, and Daniel, basically. These books were not written to inspire fear and terror, okay? A lot of modern theologians use these books to try to strike terror and fear into people. And oftentimes this has to do with, I would say, control. They're trying to control how you look at the world. They're trying to pick who you're going to be against. And that's a misuse of scriptures. The reason for Matthew 24, for Revelation, for books like Daniel, the second half of Daniel with all the prophecies, the reason for these books is definitely to increase a sense of urgency for our world and to stay, so that we'll stay alert and we'll remember who the king is. Otherwise, we become very complacent and we start following other kings. But these passages are intended to be a sort of a wake-up call for each of us, because there is the only hope that we have in this world, in a world of empires and kings who are violently clashing, and trying to conquer each other and trying to one-up each other and all claiming to be the best nation on earth. The only hope for any of this is to not take part in any of it, to claim Jesus as Lord and to claim that his kingdom will last forever, okay? None of this was intended to be about the future. This was all about the past. It was written to Christians who were living in tribulation, in terror, in suffering, and in pain. And the point of this is to, the Nicolaitans. Sean wrote Nicolaitans. That's who I was talking about earlier. Okay. That's who John is talking about. The people who like, don't be like the Nicolaitans. There you go. Thank you. Appreciate that. And so, guys, the day of the Lord, like the day when the world comes to understand who its king is not this, it was never intended to be this thing that we're supposed to scare people with. It is the great hope of all humanity. When human beings finally understand what we're doing here and who's really in charge of all of this and what we're really seeking in all of these earthly kings. Okay. It's Jesus. This is the great hope of all humanity. This is supposed to be the thing that we look forward to, not that we scare people with, not that we scare our children with. And we certainly should never use the Bible to sway people into voting for particular parties with absolute fear that like, oh, they're the representation of Satan. No, we are citizens of another kingdom entirely, okay? Once in a while, certain parties might align with the things of Jesus, but I assure you, that's probably on accident. Jesus intends for us to be very on purpose with what we're doing. And so this is not an inevitable doomsday message for the earth. This is not about the rapture. I don't believe the rapture is real. I think it was made up by an 18-year-old girl in the 1840s and made popular specifically and only in America, okay? I'm just going to go out there. It is not going to happen. It was never going to happen. And the point of the world and the point of Christianity is not to fly away from our problems. There's a mess, and God has put us here to take part in the fixing of all of it. And so if your greatest dream is the destruction of your enemies, this harkens me back to like the Left Behind series, right? If your greatest dream is the destruction of your enemies, pick up some guns and shoot the bad guys, is to watch the unbelievers get slayed in the field of Megiddo. If these are your ideas, if that's the journey that you're hoping for, their suffering, their starvation. If we read the book of Revelation and we're giddy, we're going to be whisked away and everyone's just going to suffer and starve to death. It's going to be awesome. You've missed Jesus entirely, and you likely have no idea who Jesus is. Jesus' intention is not for anyone to suffer. Jesus' intention for any suffering at all is to be for his people to pour themselves out. Our suffering would be voluntary, so that others may have life. If you are expecting some violent savior to kill and destroy your enemies, you're really going to hate Jesus. You're really not going to like him. And so these passages are not about something in the future. They are only about something in our past. They are a journey that we are all called to go on each day. There are times when, in order for us to make money today, we kind of have to bow down and worship the emperor. And John is saying to you, when that moment comes, don't do it. Don't sell your soul for money. You can't serve two gods, God and Mammon. It doesn't work that way. It's about seeing the lamb beside you every moment of your life, not the beast and the dragon and the strong man. It's about seeing the slain lamb and likening yourself to that, not the other thing. Okay. So that's a bunch of my Revelation stuff. It's not an exhaustive take on it at all. But that's a lot. That's kind of how I view things. I'm going to look at the questions here. And while I do this also, if you guys want to like chime in with stuff, that's fine. So Catherine Hannah, while we're discussing political decisions, how do you recommend approaching voting? That is a question that Christians have struggled with since the beginning of democracy. I assure you, for the first 300 years, Christians did not take part in democracy. And they did not vote because they didn't care about these earthly rulers. Am I saying that that's what we should do now? Of course not. But you have to take all these things into account. I have personal difficulties. For me, it's easy to vote for local elections, local officials, and all kinds of stuff. Of course, school boards and senators and stuff like this. I have a hard time when it comes time for me to vote for somebody who will now be in charge of an earthly military that will be bombing people, my brothers and sisters around the world. Unless they have, I mean, I kind of have Anabaptist theology these days, and I don't have in my theology a place for, like, the military doesn't fit into my theology. Like, it doesn't work. The early Christians for the first 300 years, you were literally, I blogged about this for a while. I did a very long blog series, wordpress.priestandphillips.com, something like that. I did a 4-part series on the early Christians and the pacifism of the early Christians, and how you weren't even allowed, if you were serving in the military, if you were serving on Roman Senate, if you were serving in any capacity of the kingdom, you weren't allowed to be a member of the church. And so this shouldn't be an easy thing. This should be a very difficult thing. I don't particularly have a preference for you either way, but I want you to understand, if you vote to put somebody in power and they do stupid stuff, part of that is on you, and you need to get in the way and stop it. Okay. I think it looks like Biden is probably going to be the next president at this point. But who knows? We got surprised last time. And if he is, on day one, I'm starting my campaign of, like, don't let this man take us to war again. Like, we're still fighting a war that he launched on my 21st birthday, and I will turn 40 this year. We're still fighting that stupid war that he had a massive part in starting. So, like, what do you do? I'm all over, like, local elections and stuff. I have a really hard time with the higher ones. I don't know. I don't know even what I'm going to do. I support justice. I support mercy. And I'm going to do everything I can to fight for those things. I'm not a law and order person. But I don't know. I've never had a good answer for that. Oh man, what else we got here? Did I touch on someone sent a private one and said, ask about the Antichrist and what's the deal with that? Yes, I did already discuss the Antichrist. You can go back and listen to it when this goes on the YouTube channel, probably in the next few days. Spoiler alert here. Let me just, I'll show you real quickly one more time for those who came in late. I know there was a few. Let me share my screen one more time for you, and I'll show you that slide one more time. Let me back it up. Can you see? There we go. This guy Domitian, I think this is who John was talking about. Autocrator Kaiser Domitianus Sebastos Germanicus. His name and numbers of his name equals 666. And I gave about 12 other reasons why I think this is who he's talking about. Although I'm also open to it being Nero or some combination of Domitian and Nero. So that's that. But go back and listen to that. I talked about that in detail. Oh, yeah. At what point, if any, does the focus of Revelation begin to actually shift into the future? I would say, okay, let me finish this though before I answer. And what do we make of Revelation 19, 11 through 16, where Jesus is portrayed as bringing God's wrath and striking down the nations with a sword? Yes. Okay. Perfect. So I would say, I would say it is about the past, but it's also about every generation of Christians that live. Again, you will at some point be asked in your life to worship at the altar of power and money. And he's urging you to choose the right thing. So it is for us, it is for the future. I think Christians will continue to go through tribulation, and I think we should clench closely to books like Revelation, hold on to them tightly and read them, because it's written for people going through those times. And when it talks about the kingdom of Christ will have no end, that's obviously about the future. It is giving us a picture of, like, things will work out. God is working through us. We are the instrument and the tool led by the Spirit, of which we will conquer through that. And Revelation 19 talks about Jesus being portrayed as God's wrath and striking down the nations with a sword. I want you to read that again, and I want you to read it closely. And I want you to look at where it says the sword is. The sword is in his mouth. So unless he is holding a sword like a cigar and he's swinging his head around, that's obviously a metaphor for his word, for the word of God, that can systematically dismantle all the powers of the world. And it's funny, how often I was taught to sort of, certain passages are literal, certain passages are not. And sometimes I would read one passage as metaphorical, and the very next passage would be literal again, about China or whatever, or tanks coming up out of the ground, helicopters, and then the next one would be metaphorical again. There was no rhythm to it. There was no rhyme. There was no reason. I was just being told, here's how you read the book of Revelation. It's all metaphor. The entire thing is meant for you to ponder and try to grasp. So that's what I see there. Sean says, do you think it's possible that from Revelation 21 on, new heaven and new earth being named, that this is part of this future, or should it be read with the present future tense in mind? Okay. I want to paint, I talked about this during our reasoning series on hell. I ended it sort of talking about this when somebody else brought up Revelation. First off, if I could go back to the last question and bring these two together. When you see the fire and the destruction, and you see people, it talks about Babylon is falling and the fires and the lake of fire, it's thrown into the lake of fire and it's all being destroyed, and there's weeping and gnashing of teeth. Weeping and gnashing of teeth. Gnashing of teeth is anger. Weeping is crying. This is not necessarily torture. What we're seeing is Babylon is falling. This is the message of Revelation of Domitian and his empire. The whole thing is falling because the kingdom of God, when it arises, every other leader will lose power because they cannot achieve what God is going to achieve. And so the whole thing is basically being thrown out. And what you see, the people that are watching their city fall and burn in this dream, in this vision, they're angry and they're weeping because they have spent their entire life helping to build Babylon into what it was, and they had profited from it. They'd become powerful from it. And when the kingdom of God arises from the dust and the heaven comes down and plants itself there, and heaven and earth come together, all these earthly empires are being wiped out and destroyed. And all of those who were so invested in them are losing everything they ever dreamed of. Yet God's people are gaining everything they had ever dreamed of. And you have two juxtapositions, two dichotomies being thrown at once. Like it's this beautiful picture. And book of Revelation, now I go to Revelation 21. It ends, this is the end of the book, and it ends with this final picture. Jesus on the throne, New Jerusalem, and there is a river that flows from the throne, and it flows through the city and out the gates. And pay attention when you read the Revelation 21, because it says the gates are open. And it says outside the walls of the city that has the gates, there are sorcerers and prostitutes and basically all the people who were thrown out, all the people who are rejecting the way that God is calling the people to live. And yet the river flows out of the gate, and the gates are open, and the river flows out there, and there's trees growing along the edges of the river. And it describes the trees. It says the trees whose leaves are for the healing of the nations. And that's how the Bible ends. It ends with some still on the outside, but there's still an invitation for them to be brought in. This has bothered the theologians since the beginning of Christianity. Why didn't John wrap it up? Why didn't John tell us the end? Why didn't John just say, here's exactly who's in and here's exactly who's out? Because John doesn't know, and nobody knows exactly how this is all going to end. But it ends with an invitation to everybody on the outside that you yourself can also enter in, that you can be brought in, that there's a place for you here, no matter how far gone you are. Whoever's not in the kingdom still has a chance to be brought in. So this is complicated because it leaves the door open for things like universalism, or leaves the door open for things like annihilationism. It leaves the door open for all kinds of stuff. It's not nailed down, and it's hard. And so maybe that helps. So yeah, Jillian says maybe definitely focus locally. I mean, absolutely focus locally. Absolutely. That doesn't mean you don't focus nationally or globally. Like, who knows? Chris writes on the law and order discussion, in the world that we live in with tyrants and others that would use force and terror against the innocent, who would provide the earthly physical protection if not government provided law and order? And if so, would we not need to support the idea of law and order as a necessary element of earthly governments. Yeah, I mean, it's all theoretical. When the Bible talks about law, it's literally talking about the Torah. So like, people are always using the scriptures to quote things and say, see, it says right here, the law, this and that. That's Old Testament, that's Torah, that's something different. I don't know. On this, I lean on the experts. There are countries who have shown ways that we can live with a lot less people carrying guns. There's countries where police don't carry guns at all, or they just use them for certain situations. I don't. I'm not very good at worldly politics because, in a sense, I reject the entire system as a citizen of the kingdom of God. That's sort of the Anabaptist theology. It's like no king but Jesus, no country but the kingdom of God, no flag. His banner over me is love. I don't have an army. The God of angel armies is who I follow. And my fellow citizens are literally in every country around the world. So the borders aren't necessary in my mind, all of it. So we're specifically talking about how to function earthly governments. Luther had a lot of ideas about that, but Luther also had a dual kingdom theology, which was basically like, well, now we live in these kingdoms, so we need to make these like God's kingdom as much as we can. That's literally what led to the Holocaust, though. And you can trace that all the way through. So like, people always bring up, because I'm also a pacifist, and they bring up things similar to that thought, which is like, well, what about Germany? Tyrants, Hitler taking over the world. And I would like to point out, Hitler could not have done anything that he did unless the Christians were actually supporting him from the beginning. There are enough of us in the world to where we can choose not to take part in wars. And if we did, those wars wouldn't happen. Christians easily could have stopped that war before it ever started by not taking part in any of it. But Christians were in support of it from the very beginning. There's a very small segment of Christians who were against it, and they were all thrown in prison. Ernst Käsemann, Dietrich Bonhoeffer, Rudolf Bultmann, all kinds of Christians, thinkers, and scholars were tormented during that time. So like, there's all kinds of theories on how this could all work. I think if you have justice and mercy, it can stop law and the need for law and order before you even have it. I mean, if you're filling prisons with people, you kind of need to ask the question at some point, why are these, if somebody robs a bank, you want to throw them in prison. I feel like you need to ask the question first, why did they rob the bank? Why are they struggling? Why do they need the money? Who taught them to live like this? Start small. You start on the next generation right now. Meet the needs of the people now, so people aren't being thrown in prison 10 years from now, 20 years from now. There's a lot more that we can do rather than we're trying to solve the problem afterwards by arming everybody and sending them out to round up everybody. I think that's misguided. I don't think that's the way of Christ. But I could be wrong. I'll admit that. I'm wrong about a lot of stuff. I always find out later. So, yeah, do you think there will be a time when Jesus will physically return and rule on the earth? I actually do. What that looks like, who knows? I think he'll probably, this is where I kind of revert to like Baptist theology a bit. And I sometimes get literal here. Yeah, I think Jesus is going to show up again. And yeah, I think he's going to be in Jerusalem. And yeah, you know what I mean? Like I'm kind of like, I don't have another way to read that. So why would I just invent something else? I don't have a reason to invent something else there, just so I can center it on America. Why would he come to America? And even if he came to America, they would just try to crucify him, honestly. Sorry. So yeah, that's that. We should probably wrap this up. It's 1:02. I did a lot. Maybe we'll continue more on that next time. Maybe not. If you want to, email me more thoughts, Tommy@watermarktampa.com, and I'll start doing more. Maybe I thought about next week opening up Matthew 24 for real and showing you exactly what he's talking about with Emperor Caligula and all that stuff. So, yeah, awesome. Grace and peace, everybody. Have an amazing week.
Thanks, Tommy.
Yeah, later.